You hear that?
Away from Tigerland.
Fucking up the Tigers! Round 9 is officially in the books, and apart from a couple of outcomes, it was a pretty routine round, I think. Join me as we pick apart round 9 before locking in our tips for round 10, the Indigenous round of football, one of my favourite rounds of the AFL calendar season. Sit back, relax, let's get this one underway. Round 9 kicked off with Richmond taking on Geelong at the MCG, a rivalry that we have seen grow over the last couple of years, especially since the 2020 Grand Final where Richmond came from behind to win that game. And since then, we've seen an arm wrestle between these two sides, and we've seen instances like, Tom Stewart's hit on Dion Prestia go down, and, whenever these two teams come head to head, we know we are going to get something great. We've seen games between them come down to the wire. We've seen games be absolute blowouts. But this game was one that I really felt Richmond had the chance to really take control of. And I got laughed at immensely by locking in my tip for Richmond. I'm not one of those supporters that, despite being as one-eyed as I am, I don't always tip Richmond every week, and that's not because I don't love my boys. It's because sometimes in a tipping competition you got to use your head over your heart, and I have tipped against Richmond before. I've done so this year with Melbourne versus Richmond, but I really gave us a red hot chance, especially on the back of what we saw Richmond do to Melbourne only a few weeks ago. For 3 quarters they had the better of Melbourne and they let it drop in the last, and I felt if Richmond brought that pressure that they applied to Melbourne and then used to win against West Coast, they could have a real hot crack here. And we gave it more than a fucking red hot crack. We saw Richmond's game come back to light again. We always hear Damien Hardwick and the Richmond boys talking about the Richmond way when they play football. That pressure, moving the ball forward by handball and swarming tackles and, just moving the ball on at all costs. It is coming back into the fold, and Richmond are now starting to win games again. And it's no coincidence that this has all started to happen since we've had the likes of Jaden Short and Nathan Broad, especially Nathan Broad, come back into our defensive 50. I personally thought Nathan Broad was best on ground. I think Jeremy Cameron only kicked maybe 1 goal for the night, I think. To his standards, as a player that has been regarded as one of the best in the competition, Broad kept him incredibly quiet in the fact that he didn't really have much of an input. He got a lot of the ball around the ground, but he wasn't as damaging or impactful to the scoreline as he usually is. Dustin Martin stands up and kicks 4 goals. Trent Cotchin has been, dragged through the mud during periods of the last 2 seasons because he's getting too old and the game's gone past him, but he comes out and kicks 2 goals. Tim Taranto lays 12 tackles in a game that collectively has 108. So these players are really starting to stand up and rise to the occasion. The young kids are also coming through. Daniel Rioli, running on 1 leg, was still able to be very influential in the game. Very proud of my boys. Very proud. And a lot of people are saying, they defeated a Geelong team that had X amount of players missing. And, you can only play the team that's put in front of you. And would I rather have played Geelong at full strength? Yes, I would have rather Richmond and Geelong be full strength, head to head, and see where we truly sit. I said the same thing when we played Collingwood earlier in the year, and both us and Collingwood were missing players. I would have rather us go head to head at full strength. But regardless, Richmond stand up tall, Richmond take the 4 points to open the round, and all of a sudden, a team that was looking at being a bottom 4 team is starting to climb the ladder and is starting to give me hope that we can actually turn our season around. West Coast hosted the Gold Coast up at Optus Stadium, and West Coast really had an opportunity here to play in front of a home crowd and get the job done, but injury struck yet again. I seriously am in a position right here. The last couple of weeks I've struggled to talk about how I feel about West Coast. And it just keeps getting fucking worse for them. I mean, Jack Darling has gone and fractured his arm, so he's going to be out for God knows how long. So Oscar Allen is now going to have to bear the brunt of that forward line almost single-handedly. It's coming to the point where West Coast are going to run out of players to bring into the team. And, man, I don't know. I mean, I'm lost for words with just... I don't know what they've done to piss off the AFL guys this much to be suffering this fucking bad. On the flip side of things, the Gold Coast, currently sitting in 11th position, are playing some really good football. And it's on the back of players like Matty Rowell and Noah Anderson. And coming into this game, I think it was even a week prior to this game, I'm one of those people that like to sit down and watch every single game of football over a weekend. Regardless of whether Richmond's playing or not, I'll watch all 9 games of football. And I made a comment that I didn't think Matty Rowell was going to live up to the hype that he had when he first came into the system and then did all those injuries. But to find out statistically that he's one of the best tacklers in the comp, contested possessions and possession getting, he's up there as well. He's really flying under the radar, Matty Rowell. He's having a really good year, and it's no surprise that the Gold Coast on the back of that are reaping reward as well. Sydney hosted Fremantle at the SCG in a game that they very well should have, and I believed would have, turned their fortunes around after a loss to Collingwood the week prior and get a win at home. And it was far from the fact. Fremantle, I don't think, ever looked like they were ever going to lose this game. Their midfielders were running amok, easy rebound 50s, hitting targets up forward. They were finding goals out of every opportunity that they could find. On the other side of things, Errol Goulden, a player who's only had a couple of years in the system, trying to bear the brunt of everything on his own in the midfield, isn't going to get it done for Sydney. And I turn attention to Lance Franklin. Now, this is a man who a week prior was jeered by the Collingwood faithful in the crowd, and a lot of people decided to take the route of the fact that he was getting booed because he is of Indigenous descent. And, I made comments about it last week. We're not going to dive into that fact, but I feel excuses are going to be made for Buddy playing poorly because of all the attention he had in the media, and he wasn't able to get his head right, and we can make all the excuses we want. This is a man who is getting paid millions upon millions of dollars to play the game. He's at the end of his career. I can understand that. He's at a Hall of Fame worthy career. I understand that. He will very much end up a Hall of Fame legend. He'll reach legend status, maybe even immortal status, who knows. But I think the lack of input he had in this game is part of the reason why he was getting jeered the week prior. This is a man who is taking up a lot of salary cap space from the Sydney Swans. This is a man who went to Sydney on the promise of helping delivering premierships. He has failed to do so. And once again, kept incredibly quiet. I don't know where the let-up comes from for Sydney. I personally feel like they play better without Lance Franklin, because players like Amadi, players like McDonald, they then have avenues to become, forward targets, and Sydney don't become so Buddy-centric. They don't have to always get the ball to Buddy. But with Logan McDonald now going down with injury, Callum Mills has now gone down with injury, Sydney's really going to start feeling the brunt of injuries to key players, and I feel they're probably... I don't know, this could be a turning point in the road for them where they go down a negative route, because, Callum Mills has been incredibly influential to Sydney. Logan McDonald, he might not hit the scoreboard every week, but just getting his hands on the ball and providing a contest has been critical to Sydney. So moving forward, it'll be interesting to see how Sydney cope without players like that in their system. On the flip side, Fremantle finding a way to get the job done, but I still question why Nat Fyfe isn't being utilised the way he should be. I'm still very anti Nat Fyfe as a tactical sub. I'm still very anti Nat Fyfe as a deep forward option. I feel he should be getting more midfield minutes. I really do. But hey, Fremantle banked the 4 points, so they're doing something right. Right? North Melbourne hosted Port Adelaide in Tasmania, and I said that Tasmania could potentially provide a ground for North Melbourne to get an early jump on Port. And for the first quarter, it was a good contest to watch. And then the avalanche started, and then Port Adelaide just ran away with the game. And for North Melbourne, it didn't get any better. Aidan Corr cops a week suspension for a strike, I believe it was. Cam Zirra ends up with a fractured face bone, like he fractured something in his head, and then Luke Davies-Uniacke ends up with a injury as well, which is going to see him sidelined. Cam Zirra and Luke Davies-Uniacke are probably the two most influential players for North Melbourne. Cam Zirra is their X-factor up forward who has been rotating through the midfield, and Luke Davies-Uniacke for the early part of this season was probably front-running the Brownlow and running at an all-Australian pace. And this is a team that has been going down this downhill trajectory for weeks now, and now they're starting to lose their most important players to injury. I feel it's only going to get worse for these guys, and I feel for them because they had a great start to the year. And even though I'm not a North Melbourne fan, it was good to see these young kids, you know, with a lot of spirit. You know, they were up and about. There was motivation about them all. There was so much charisma going on. And now it's just gone to shit. And then on the flip side again, drastically, you had a team that struggled at the start of the year who is now really firmed as a top 4, you know, team. This is a team I don't think Port Adelaide drop out of the top 4 moving forward. I really don't. I feel there are games they are going to drop, especially over the next month or two. But they're looking really good. Their best is amongst some of the best. Could this be the year that they finally break through to a grand final? I really feel they've got the makeup to get there. Whether or not they will because of the teams around them that are contending for that spot as well is to be, you know, yet to be seen. But I definitely think they have the makeup to do some damage in September. I laughed this game off a little bit last week in my tipping video, and that was no disrespect to Hawthorn fans. It was only because Fox Footy were lauding this game as a blockbuster. Hawthorn versus Melbourne. And for the first half of football, it was very much not. And it was hard to watch in part with Melbourne just scoring so freely. And as a Hawthorn fan, I don't know how they would have felt having to endure watching that. But Hawthorn is starting to show glimpses. They're showing that they've got the key components in place. It's just the lack of game time that this unit has had together that is really getting to them. And as I've pointed out a few weeks in a row now, once these kids all develop through the system together and they hit their stride, this is going to be a team to be reckoned with. But until that point, while all of this experience is getting gathered up, they might just be one of those stepping stone teams that a team kind of leapfrogs to further their seasons on. That's probably a poor choice of words, but Hawthorn, to me, until it clicks, are just going to be one of those bottom 4, bottom 5 teams that might put in, you know, a win every now and again, but unfortunately are gonna fall short. Whereas Melbourne, again, probably another round where it's been unfairly fixtured to the point where Melbourne now in back-to-back weeks have played bottom tier teams and they've won quite convincingly. And this is a season where there's a fair few teams in the mix for finals this year. You know, we've had performances from teams that we didn't expect to see perform that way, whether it be, you know, positively or negatively. But then on the flip side, you've got teams coming up like Essendon, for example, fixtured to play North Melbourne and West Coast in back-to-back weeks. And not only that, but they play North Melbourne and West Coast twice in back-to-back weeks. So I really feel this floating fixture needs to be dropped and something concrete needs to be given at year's start, because I feel fixturing-wise, it's not on an equal playing field for all teams, if that makes sense. I think some teams have had a better rub than others, which I know it all goes off of, you know, ladder positioning and everything else, but I feel sorry for teams like Hawthorn and West Coast who we know are struggling teams, but we'd like to see them have opportunity to win instead of having their backs against the wall consistently. I don't know, I just feel something needs to be done. Brisbane hosted Essendon in a game where in the first quarter I thought it was going to be incredibly low scoring and the quality of football that was being played wasn't really the best, but then Brisbane put their foot down on the pedal and just ran away with the game. And it was another game where for every goal Essendon would come back with, Brisbane would then go and kick another 2. And Joe Danaher comes out and has one of the best games I've ever seen him play, I feel, as a Lion. And ironically, against his old club, ends up kicking the same amount of goals off his own boot that Essendon do as a collective. He made a big statement in this game. He's got all the potential, Joe Danaher. He's just never lived up to that potential, I feel. He's always fallen short of the mark in a competition where he's got the skill set to really take a stranglehold on the competition. This is a man that should have probably won a couple of Colemans by now. I don't know. You tell me. And Essendon, they just continue going down this downhill trajectory as well. Another team, just like North Melbourne, that started off the season incredibly strong and has seen a slow dip. I feel Darcy Parish missing for the next month of football is really going to hurt Essendon, and I feel a lot of people underrate how influential Darcy Parish is to this team. And we look at the next month of football for Essendon. They play Richmond, then they play West Coast, then they play North Melbourne, then they play Carlton. If they don't win at least 3 of those 4 games, finals and being impactful enough to do damage in finals kind of starts to be questioned, because this is a team that for a long period of time people were saying, oh shit, Essendon's really turned it around, they're going to do some damage. And we've just seen this drop-off. And even though the drop-off has happened, they've still been competitive. They just haven't been competitive enough to get over the line. So the next month is really going to test the Bombers and see where they're at. Whereas on the flip side, Brisbane just continue to find a way to win, and win in a quite convincing way. They're really starting to install faith in myself as picking them as the premiers for this year, that they can and very might will be lifting that cup come the end of grand final day. Carlton versus the Bulldogs. Oh, a game I would rather forget, because this was the only blemish aside from the Fremantle Sydney game that I had on this particular round. I backed in Carlton, and I shouldn't have. It's actually the second week back-to-back I've gone against the Dogs, and the Dogs have proven me wrong. So maybe that's starting to tell me something. But this is a game up until three-quarter time that was not very entertaining to watch, and Carlton opting to go with all of these around-the-body snaps in the forward 50. Michael Voss needs to grow a set of balls and drag these fucking players. He needs to get stuck into Harry Mackay, who has had 0 to no impact for the last, month and a half. Jesse Motlop, and whoever else thinks that it's smart to go around the body kick when routine drop punts are still very much alive and are still very much a thing. I don't know whether it's taking the piss, but Harry Mackay on the boundary from 40-45 out, and he opts to go for a snap. When this is a guy that has won a Coleman medal and can easily kick a drop punt from the same spot, and I reckon his drop punt would probably be more accurate. I don't understand. Because in the end, this is a game that Carlton ended up turning around and only lost by a few goals. The last quarter of football was one of the most entertaining quarters I've seen in a very long time, because the back and forth and the comeback from Carlton was huge. Halfway through the third quarter, Carlton fans 2 weeks in a row are leaving the stadium and heading home early. At that point in time, when they were all leaving, Carlton managed to get back to only 14 points down, and they were still leaving the game. I don't understand how a supporter can get up and leave the ground early. I have endured losses from a couple of points to 10 plus goals, and I have sat down until the final siren. I just don't understand how a supporter can just up and walk out. I feel free to discuss it with me in the comments below, because to me, I'm ride or die Richmond. I'm win, loss or draw. They've always got my support. To see supporters leaving so early in a game, very disrespectful, I personally feel. But yeah, Carlton, the goal kicking needs to get fucking dragged. Michael Voss needs to say something, because going around the body and blatantly missing all these shots is starting to become common trend with Carlton, and I think the Carlton fans are getting fed up with it as well. Adelaide hosted St Kilda in a game that I tipped Adelaide to win, but I didn't think they would be like 10 goals better. St Kilda never looked like they were going to win this game at all. Adelaide pretty much had them dead in the water at quarter time. So much so to the point that the Adelaide coach makes the tactical sub and takes Rory Laird off the field to give him a bit of a rest, because they had that much of a stranglehold on the game. They couldn't have lost at that point, so why not sit your best player on the bench? Why not? I mean, it's not like some of us have Supercoach teams and have Rory Laird in the midfield, you fucking bastard. But in all honesty, I've said it for the last few weeks. I said it before the season even started, that Adelaide were going to be the big movers this year. A lot of people discredited that, comment I made in that point in time. And yet at the moment, they're looking like they'll all but play finals this year. They're going to finish in the top 8. I feel they're going to finish anywhere from, 6th to 5th. I think they're going to sit in the middle of the table in the top 8. Mark Robinson comes out this week saying that they've got the team to win the flag. Is this the best iteration of Adelaide that we have seen since the 2017 grand final? I personally think it is. I'm getting levels of that dominance from this team. Obviously, they're not the same because Adelaide finished as minor premiers, I believe, that year. But when you look at the grander scope of things, Adelaide have managed to rebuild this team that was a premiership contender and then dropped off for years. But now they've got the mix back together again, but the mix is with a lot younger kids. And the fact that these kids have gelled so quickly and are doing this amount of damage early, this team is going to be fucking scary once they hit their peak collectively. As for St Kilda, another team, yet again, started the season off strong, but have found, some struggles in recent weeks. And whether this continues with Max King now available to come back into the mix and do some damage potentially up forward, I don't know. But question marks now starting to pop up everywhere. Jack Steele's only just come back from injury. He gets subbed out of the game. Ross Lyon was saying it was precautionary, but do we believe that? Has he sustained another injury? Players like Sinclair, who have been, in All-Australian form all year, zero to no influence on the game at all. Oh, it was hard to watch from a St Kilda point of view because my dad's a St Kilda fan and I know he struggled to watch it, so much so that he might have fallen asleep once or twice during the game. And the final game saw Collingwood hosting GWS at the MCG. I was going to say modern day rivalry. It probably isn't a modern day rivalry, but these two teams in recent years have put on some really close matches, and GWS have had the best of Collingwood for the majority. And Collingwood put them to the sword and fucking annihilated them. Collingwood still, to me, are the team to beat this year. I said Brisbane would win the premiership, but Collingwood have proven statistically and, thematically throughout the season, they are the team to knock off. They are the team that will be there at, the end of it all, grand final day. It's just a matter of who's going to take them on and who's going to try to take the cup out of their hands. That's how I feel, because Collingwood's best has been the best all year, without question. And they're scary good to the point where Mason Cox is now playing himself into form. And this is a player that until yesterday, or the day before, because today's Tuesday, but you know what I mean, up until the Collingwood game, he had only played maybe 2 decent games in his entire career. He comes out and has the best home and away game he's ever played in his life. And I tell you now, if Mason Cox is playing himself into form, how do you fucking think the rest of the Collingwood boys are going? That's all I'm fucking saying on that subject. Hot pies! Anyone want some fucking hot pies? I took a gamble on Richmond this week in hoping I could move up the ranks in the tips, and I tipped 7 out of 9. Fremantle beating Sydney and Bulldogs beating Carlton were the 2 games I slipped up on. I thought 7 out of 9 was enough to maybe top this week, but 8 out of 9 was in fact enough to top it, and only 2 people in the competition did so. Congratulations to Frio90, Courtney K, and the blooper reel, Jason G, a very close friend of mine, both getting 8 out of 9 for the weekend. Congratulations to the pair of you for topping the league for round 9. As for overall leader, heading into round 10, we do have one person outright on top of the ladder, and that person is Benny Craig, Benjamin R, sitting on top with 60 total tips, 3 tips clear of a four-way tie for second place with Macca 0303, Rockstar Pool 69, Brighton 75, and NATO. We then have a three-way tie for third place, which sees Magpie Army 2016, Saintly 12, and Team Wiggles. And then we have Equals Macon in 9th, and Zirra TGK up in fucking 10th. I've broken into the top 10 after dwindling down the bottom of the ladder early on. To think the first 3 rounds of the year, I only tipped 4 out of 9, and I've bounced back top 10. It feels fucking good. Not as good as the Tigers getting up, but it's still fucking good. With all that out of the way, it's time to lock in our tips for round 10, the Indigenous round. As I said at the top of the video, one of my favourite rounds on the AFL calendar. It's always good to celebrate the Indigenous people, not just within the AFL, but within Australia altogether. We know the history of everything that they've endured, that they still endure to this day, and just taking the time to acknowledge the impact the Indigenous people have had on the game, and some of the greatest players to play the game have been Indigenous. You know, I'm just happy to have a position within a community that supports those people. We might have some bigots in the crowds and stuff that do boo for racism and all that fucking cause, but to see a celebration like this, to celebrate the Indigenous culture and see all the teams rally behind it with all the different jersey designs we get every year, which, by the way, the Richmond jersey design this year is fucking mint. I just really love the spectacle of it all. I really do. We kick things off on Friday night at Adelaide Oval with Port Adelaide taking on Melbourne. This is a game where it's heavily gone Melbourne's way, but I feel there is room for Port Adelaide to do some damage in this game. I really do. I think Melbourne do win this game, though. I think they win it by 15 points. I think it's going to be a close game. It might be a tip that I very well change coming into it, but I just feel Melbourne are defensively more sound. I think they're more set up for how Port Adelaide bring the ball in. Port Adelaide are one of those teams that, love popping the ball up for players like Todd Marshall, players like Charlie Dixon to get underneath. And I think, Jake Lever, Stephen May, players like that are really going to relish the opportunity to get those intercept marks. Saturday afternoon, Marvel Stadium, North Melbourne taking on Sydney. This is the week where Sydney bounce back. If they struggle against North Melbourne, then they've got some serious problems. But again, opens the door for North Melbourne against a team that have struggled in recent weeks. Could they get the better of Sydney? There is a universe, I feel, where it could happen. I don't think it will, but we've seen fucking stranger things happen this year. Mars Stadium, Bulldogs taking on Adelaide. I'm actually tipping Adelaide. I'm actually quite surprised Adelaide only have 28% tipster's choice here. Adelaide have played the better brand of football, I personally feel, all year. They are sitting, below Bulldogs on the ladder currently. This is a 6th versus 8th spot, so this is a game that is going to go a long way to both sides, if they win, to setting up the rest of their season. But I feel Adelaide's upside is better than the Bulldogs' upside. I'm backing the Adelaide Crows in to get the job done. Optus Stadium, Saturday afternoon, Fremantle Geelong. I think Geelong travel up there and get the job done quite convincingly. Fremantle had a good win against Sydney. Could very well bring momentum back with them to Optus Stadium. But I feel Geelong, after losing to Richmond, they're one of those teams that will hang their hat on that loss and learn a lot from it and get better. And I think Fremantle this week is the team that's going to cop the brunt of that. And I feel, even though Nathan Broad was able to quell Jeremy Cameron for a bit, structurally with Fremantle's defensive line, I don't think there is anyone there that would come out of that system or break that system to follow Jeremy Cameron up the ground, and I feel that's where Jeremy Cameron's going to be most impactful, and I think he's really going to break this game open. Saturday night has 2 games go down. Again, I don't know why you would have 2 games clashing, especially with Dreamtime at the G, one of them. But we have the Q clash with Brisbane taking on the Gold Coast, and we're going to lock in Brisbane. Brisbane at the Gabba has made a lot of sense this year. You always back them in. They're playing really good football. Gold Coast are playing good football, don't get me wrong, but there are still gaps where they allow too much to happen, and a lack of defensive pressure kind of opens them up a little bit. And I feel the Lions are going to capitalise on that. And I feel, even though defensively Gold Coast have improved a lot, it's going to take a hell of a team to quell Brisbane's forward line. I don't think the Gold Coast have that makeup to get it done. The dream time at the G-Clash, Essendon Richmond. I'm backing in my boys. The only change that I foresee happening with this game is Jacob Hopper is out for short term, which is going to be probably about 3 to 4 weeks. Toby Nankervis is due to come back in, and that is going to be a huge turnaround for Richmond. I would have given Essendon half a chance with no Toby Nankervis, but I feel with him back in the team, it allows Richmond to do some structural things that we haven't been able to do for a few weeks. You know, Samson Ryan can now play as a dedicated forward. Ben Miller can play as a, dedicated tall defender. Jacob Hopper is going to be missing a lot in that midfield, but I feel with Darcy Parish out and someone like a Tim Taranto for Richmond coming in, we might actually have the jump on their midfield group, and that's going to go a long way to setting Richmond up. I think Richmond are going to win this one by 4 goals. Sunday afternoon kicks off at Tasmania with Hawthorn taking on the Eagles. I'm going to back in Hawthorn down at Tassie. They've played good football down there. We've seen them play good football in recent years down there. West Coast might even struggle to get a team together for this game. And I feel if Hawthorn can play this game out from start to finish like they played out the third quarter against Melbourne this past week, they'll set themselves up for a very good win here. A lot of supporters out there are calling this game the Harley Reid Cup because Hawthorn and West Coast are currently fighting for who's going to get the number 1 pick in the draft. So, very much so, whoever loses this might end up with Harley Reid on their team next year. Who knows? The MCG sees Carlton taking on Collingwood. I don't see any way how Carlton beats Collingwood here. They've struggled for answers against the Western Bulldogs. They've struggled for answers against other teams. They're coming up against the best in the competition this year. Collingwood are going to slaughter them. And then we have GWS hosting St Kilda at Giant Stadium, and I think the Saints are going to bounce back with a win here. I'd be surprised if they didn't. This tip might change if Toby Green comes back into the lineup, because I feel Toby Green could be an influencing factor on this game. But I'm happy to leave it there for the time being. So I've gone for Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, Geelong, Brisbane, Richmond, Hawthorn, Collingwood, and St Kilda. Thank you guys for joining me for another video. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, do me a favor and hit that like button down below. Be sure to subscribe as well. And make sure you hit that notification bell so you get notified whenever I upload. Because not only have I already made the announcement that there is going to be a change coming next year in the form of a new YouTube channel. I'm thinking of doing a dedicated AFL channel which will have weekly videos come out and we'll talk about different stuff, maybe a podcast each week. I really want to take AFL and run with it in a direction with a couple of people I know, so if that's something you're keen on seeing, let me know in the comments down below. And AFL 23 action will be coming to this channel. I'm just waiting for more patches and stuff to go down because there are some components to that game that are missing that I've wanted to have in place to do certain playthroughs, and I can't do that currently with the state that the game is in. So although it might be a bit of a wait, you guys will get it once it's ready to launch, so trust me that there's going to be plenty inbound. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here. Good luck to your teams this weekend, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.